We are here for the first webinar on sustainability of an incubator with CSR and government funds. Now I request Bhavya, who is also a young professional at first, for introducing our guest speaker for today's session.
Hello everyone, this is Bhavya Goswami from SIIC IIT Kanpur. So today we have Mr. Rahul Patel as our speaker for this evening. So Mr. Rahul Patel is a Vice President for Strategy and Initiatives, IIT Kanpur. He has spearheaded many initiatives at Incubation Center and has been a co-member for COVID support projects such as AMBIO2, India COVID Support and the Ventilator Project in recent past. He has been a significant contributor for CSR connections in incubation ecosystem at IIT Kanpur. Also, he has helped startups to achieve grassroots level impact, leveraged in form of technology information. He has been a constant source of information for guidance for startups, innovators in both technical as well as business aspects. Today in this session, he will walk us through how Incubator will achieve the capacity building and long-term sustainability. And also we will know how to avail the support of CSR initiatives in this event. I request all the participants, if you have any doubts or confusion, please put the questions in the Q&A box. And now I request Mr. Rahul Patel to start the session. So Rahul sir, over to you.
Thanks, Bhavya. Thanks, Akansha, and to the team, and a very good evening to all of you who have joined. The objective of today's session was essentially, if I understood correctly, to help us, help the tied G1 and G2 and G3. G1 center to hum khud hi hain. So yeah, G2 and G3 centers to understand, how the sustainability can be brought into the incubation ecosystem. We are fortunate that we can talk about it because the incubation center at IIT Kanpur was set up when none of us were, not in the picture, when the startup ecosystem was very nascent in the country. And this has been 2 decades journey for our incubation center. And over the 2 decades, we have learned a lot of things, which vary, which range from writing the grant applications for minuscule amounts, reaching out to different banks, different funding agencies for supporting our startups, and now having the multiple center of excellences with different ministries, different funding agencies, along with it multiple funding programs, multiple schemes, with the continuous support from our corporate partners and CSR partners. So I'll begin with a small presentation that I've created just for this purpose. The objective of the presentation is not to convey the deep information, but just to give a brief outline. And I would be happy to answer the question that you have. As Bhavya mentioned, you can put the questions in the message box. Otherwise, once I've completed the presentation, which will be hardly 10-15 minutes, you can also start the Q&A or the direct engagement with you. You can ask the question, you can raise the hand in the Zoom, and I'll be more than happy to answer. Let me see if I can share the screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, is it? Yes.
Okay. So moving to the first part, most of you would be aware, but I thought, just it would be good idea to, start from the basics. And the first principle, that what makes an incubator, because if you are talking about sustainability of the incubator, सबसे important component है कि आपको ये पता हो कि incubator में component हैं कौन-कौन से. Once you know what are the components, then we can look at how to build the sustainability in each of the components, or which are the components which are going to be always a cost factors, and which are the components that can be a revenue generating factors. Obviously, it starts from the team, because even if you don't have the facilities, even if you don't have the separate infrastructure for the incubation center, you can always have a team which can work directly with the institutes, and it can start supporting the startups, it can start acceleration programs, and it can start facilities. When I say, I mean labs, because most of us are technology business incubators, which is one component of the incubators. And technology-based incubators are primarily the incubators which are set up in the universities or institutes ecosystem, where the idea is to leverage the technology background, technology know-how of the institute's faculty members and the facilities of the institute and infrastructure to actually use it, for the support of incubating companies or the startups. In terms of infrastructure, essentially, once you are growing, you have a team, you have some companies, some startups incubated with you. You would need a separate infrastructure setup, which can be a separate building, which can be a separate office space, which can be something, a co-working space, but something which you will need, whether in the vicinity or the ecosystem of the institute or maybe separately, but you will need something where you and the companies that you are supporting can actively participate in your infrastructure. Apart from it, since you are supporting these startups, since you are supporting the innovators, you certainly need grant and funds to support these innovators and startups at the early stage. To bring these startups, you will need a lot of outreach, whether it's offline or online. On both kinds, we'll have to spend. Apart from it, to help these startups also, you'll need to do outreach into the investment ecosystem, investment community, business ecosystem, business connect. Then obviously, since we are talking about the incubation, where a lot of grant agreements, where a lot of revenue agreements, MOUs, equity and revenue sharing agreements will be part and parcel of your day-to-day activities. So finance and legal will be an important component. Some incubators hire separate teams. At the early stage, you may just look at the consulting component of these finance and legal aspects. Then you also need mentorship and advisory. In some of the cases where you are looking at mentors advices which are very, very relevant and say retired kind of people who have retired from the normal day-to-day life of professionals and are now actively enjoying their life. If they want to become the mentor advisors, they usually don't take fees. But if you are looking somebody who actively engages into mentoring and advising of these startups in one or the multiple areas, you certainly need to pay them some mentorship or advisory fees. Apart from it, you also need to organize multiple events. Your team will have to travel, your startup will have to travel. And these combined, all the components combined essentially makes the expense side of the incubator, which have to be taken care by the grants and the fund support that the incubator team can bring in. In terms of funding supports, I've tried to divide the funding sources into two parts. One is primary and one is secondary. Because primary source of funding is once you set up the incubator, these things can be recurring source of funding for your incubator. The first part is interest from the corpus fund. So the way the whole incubation ecosystem is structured in India is most of the incubators, government funded incubators primarily, have been set up through a corpus fund, which has been either donated by the institute itself or from the relevant funding agencies, which can be the government, it can be a state government or a central government body. It can be a bank, it can be a HNI who has generously donated corpus fund for your incubator. It can be any of the funds, but essentially a corpus fund from which the interest can be generated continuously, and that supports essentially the day-to-day functionalities or the activities of the incubator. Second is the facilitation fee from support grants. So as all of you would have seen, we have multiple schemes, multiple funding agencies for different kind of support to these startups. And each of the funding agency or the scheme essentially comes with the support grant that goes to the incubating companies or the startups. Along with it, usually a 10% of that total grant is given to the incubation center for its activities, for its sustenance. So that essentially becomes a primary source of funding, because that is the usual process and recurring revenue for the incubators. Third is the facility uses. So if you have created the lab infrastructure particularly for the incubator, any startup which is using the incubator will certainly pay you a fees. If your facilities are including co-working space and such facilities, you certainly get monthly fees to be used, to these facilities to be used. So that essentially also becomes a regular source of income for your incubator, and that's why it is included in the primary source here in the classification. Then when you are writing to the government program, a lot of government programs where they may not be going with the second part, which is the 10% of the support grant, they may have the operational component, which can be salary, which can be travel, which can be consumables. So operational support from different government programs can also come in. These are usually the primary source. Obviously, the classification is not purely black and white. So some of the primary source for some incubator at a particular stage can be secondary, and vice versa as well. In the secondary sources of revenue, you will see usually the operation and admin support from the CSR fund. So if later on we'll talk about the detail in CSR funds, but when you are looking for a CSR fund from any corporate, usually the CSR funds will certainly allow you to have 5% to 10% of the total fund for your operational and admin support in execution of the supported fund, because you will need to report, you will need to generate CA certified reports, you'll need to generate progress reports, you will also have to do assessment reports. So all of these, and also you'll have to do agreements for every money that you are spending. So all of these things will certainly need a lot of operation and admin support, for which usually the CSR funds will come with 5 to 10% of the source of the fund to be utilized as the funding for the incubators activities. Then in some of the cases like us, since we have been a primary, we have been an old incubator, and our portfolio ranges from startups at very early stage to a later stage where they are considerably making revenues. A revenue share can also be part of the support that incubator seeks. Then you have non-recurring support, because there are certain funding schemes. To give an example, Nidhi Center of Excellences, or Atal incubation centers, or many such schemes where you will have a component which is a non-recurring component of these fundings. And these non-recurring components usually are when you have to use this money lab banane ke liye, you have to use this money for purchasing equipments, you need to use this money for one-time activities. So which are mostly the non-recurring support, all of those can be considered in this part. Why these are secondary? Because these schemes are usually on the application basis, and these are not the rolling funds. So if an incubator gets it one time, doesn't mean that they will also get it for the second time. So that's why these are usually the secondary sources. Then, since every incubator will take the equity or revenue share from the startup that they are incubating, it will be either against equity or revenue share. So revenue share component will be discussed in the second proportion. If you are taking equity in the incubating company, say 1%, 2%, or 3%, or in some cases, I think it is up to 5% as well. Whenever there is an exit, which happens through the secondary sale, or so far I have not seen any company which is incubated going for an IPO yet in the country. So through the acquisition, through the further funding in the rounds 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are series A, B, C, D, and so on, you can expect an exit for your incubator because you sell the equity that you hold to the next investor. Then in most of these schemes like Nidhi Seed Support or Bayrak Seed or any such schemes, you give equity and debt, both kind of support to these startups. When you are giving a debt support, it's essential that the startups will pay back that debt. The money is coming from a separate source. You are the facilitation agency. But when the money goes to the company and when they return back, the same money doesn't have to be given to the primary source. In a lot of cases, the funding agencies allow you to have the capital with you when it has been brought back as the debt repayment. But the money has to be reinvested in the next set of startups or the incubating companies. It can be against equity, revenue, or similarly, debt share, but it has to be reinvested. So whenever you get the outcome of that particular funding, that essentially also becomes a secondary source of revenue. Why secondary? Because you don't know when the money will be back, when you will see the exit, when you will see the debt investment coming back. Usual funding agencies. This program is already sponsored by TIDE 2.0 of MITI. MITI is one of the primary funding agencies for the incubators. DST, on the other hand, also has been funding a lot of initiatives. Their primary initiatives are named under Nidhi scheme, which has an EIR, Prayas, Seed Support, Center of Excellences, Accelerators, many such schemes. Similarly, for the biotechnology, BIRAC has been the body which is under Department of Biotechnology, and they have been also funding fellowships called Disperse, big grants for the prototype development, BIAC seed support for the scale up for the seed support, and LEAP and many other components for this. Then there is an Atal Innovation Mission, which has been funding a lot of AICs, which are Atal Incubation Centers. And also there are multiple schemes that they keep coming up through Invest India and many other government agencies. DSIR is a body under, I think, Ministry of Science only. They have a scheme called PRISM, and through PRISM scheme, they keep supporting innovators, and these are called TEP centers, not the incubators, which they support. But the functioning of TEP and incubator is same, and in most of the cases, the incubators are the TEP centers. So whatever money you get from the DSIR essentially comes through incubator. Then MSME has been also very active in last couple of years. They were earlier active, but in certain terms, they were sort of throughout 2010 to 2015 were not very active ministry as far as the incubators are concerned. But recently we have seen a lot of activities happening at MSME and for the incubator. So they are funding through design scheme, they are funding through business incubator scheme. So all of these funding agencies are the primary funding agencies. It doesn't mean these are the only funding agencies. Because if you see, apart from these central funding agencies, in every state now you have a state startup policy or state startup schemes. Through these schemes, you get funding for the incubator, you get funding for the incubating companies, you get funding for the startups or the innovators. So all of that funding also comes from the state agencies. So that is driven by the state policy. But in usual circumstances, in usually every startup policy of a state allows you to have a small amount of fund for the startups, incubators, and everything. CSR, why CSR? Because CSR has been recently mandated for to be allowed in the government funded incubators as a legit grant that the corporates can give. For some of you who may not have heard this lot of discussions about CSR, fund being forwarded into PM cares and such thing. CSR outlay in the country is more than, I think, 5,000 crores. And even if the 5% of the total outlay comes for the incubation ecosystem in the country, I think that would be a strong support for most of the incubators. What I've seen is engaging with the CSR component of the corporate funds. Usually, some of the major CSR which have already a fully fledged system set up, like HDFC or certain funds. So they would expect you to apply for the funding process. They would have a set criteria of the application form and all. In most of the other cases, because the CSR has been a very new thing, particularly for the incubators, the fields are primarily not very well defined. So you need to write the application or the proposals. You need to reach out to the CSR head of the corporate and place your proposals in front of them. They will discuss and will ask for certain pointers, feedbacks, and then present the proposal to in the front of the CSR committee of the corporate. And then based on what amount of money they have available, they would fund you for the proposal either entirely or in parts. The usual components of a CSR proposal look like this, because we have been writing a lot of proposals, so we keep following these certain frameworks where you have to define the background of the project proposal, why you are writing this proposal, why giving the money from the overall impact corpus, which is the CSR corpus, to you would make sense. That you have to define. You also have to give an introduction of the incubator, where you have to define what kind of activities your incubator has been primarily doing, what are the domain areas that you are primarily involved, what kind of portfolio you have, what kind of initiative you have taken in the previous years. So all of that has to be mentioned. Third component is usually the reference of the successful initiative that you have taken with the CSR support. This can be from the same CSR, from the same corporate. It can also be from other corporate that you have worked with, but certainly giving a reference of successful CSR initiative will help your proposal in getting through. Third component, obviously, the most important component is the details of the proposal that you are submitting. What will be the objective of this initiative? What are the startup or innovators going to be involved? How the activities will be planned? What kind of benefits will come out of this for the particular startups? And what is the money involved? How much money do you need for the activities? What amount of money you will be giving to these startups or the innovators? What will be the process of disbursing the money? All of that component is part of the budget part. Then the potential impact, what kind of social impact the proposal can be drive, whether it is the environmental impact, whether it is the socio-economic impact, all of that impact has to be discussed. And if possible, you must map this against the SDGs. SDGs is Sustainable Development Goals that have been defined by UN. And now most of the impact component of the country's work, whether it is government or non-government funds, is used to tap through SDG. What kind of impact this has generated, and there are, I think, close to 30 SDGs. So you have different SDGs for different components. So poverty reduction, poverty elevation, water management, all of these are components. So you can define which particular component your this particular proposal is going to support or help. Then obviously you have to talk about the reporting framework now, particularly because the CSR has come under a lot of scrutiny. The amount of activities have been increasing. So government has given certain frameworks to be followed. So reporting structure has to be becomes very important. So what kind of reporting framework you can follow in the program? Obviously, all this you can propose. Eventually, the funding agency will come back and tell you, we need this kind of framework. What you proposed is okay or not, and they will either add or subtract some of the components. And then obviously the last part becomes basically the documentation that you already have, whether it is CSR Form 1 or some of the other kind. All of that you need to take care in the documentation part. This is the first component of the presentation. I'll stop for 5 minutes to take up question answers on this, and then I have another presentation, a brief presentation about how the CSR, how and what component of CSR are there, and what you should do before you start applying or reaching out to the other corporates. So
yes.
Yeah.
So sir,
Bhavya, are you going to ask the questions? Yeah, please.
Yes, sir, I can take up the question. Yeah. So first question we have from TIIC ABV IITM Gwalior. So he is asking how an incubator can check a startup. Is he also incubated at another place? If the startup is incubated at another place, how can an incubator check?
So thanks for asking the question. It is a question that we keep dabbling. मतलब हमारे पास बहुत बार ऐसा होता है कि कंपनी आती है और वो मल्टीपल जगह अप्लाई कर देती है. दो चीजें हैं. I'll answer the question in two components. पहला ये है कि आप कैसे पता कर पाएंगे, और दूसरा ये कि मतलब आपको पता करना चाहिए how important or how difficult it should be, how important it should be to see कि वो अगर कहीं incubated है तो आपको उसे support करना है या नहीं करना है. There is no detailed framework or the registration place जहां पर सारे companies का detail है, where you can see which company is incubated where. One thing that you can do is you can see the annual report of the startup, and if they have given the shares, they would have certainly allocated. उसका नाम और नंबर आपको दिखेगा उसमें. तो one simple thing you can do is कि कॉर्पोरेट डायरेक्टरी जो है आपकी MOCA की, उसमें जाकर के आप स्टार्टअप की फाइलिंग चेक करेंगे और उसमें आपको शेयर होल्डर लिस्टिंग दिख जाएगी. अगर उन्होंने ऑलरेडी कहीं इंक्यूबेटर करके इक्विटी दिया होगा तो वहां से पता चल जाएगा. बट अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस आई डोंट थिंक देयर इज एनी अदर प्लेस जहां से आप पता कर सकते हैं कि वो कहीं और इंक्यूबेटेड है या नहीं है. दैट इज द फर्स्ट कंपोनेंट. सेकंड कंपोनेंट की उससे फर्क पड़ना चाहिए कि नहीं, अनलेस एंड अनटिल द स्टार्टअप इज नॉट अप्लाइंग फॉर द सेम स्कीम. सो फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर उन्होंने हमारे यहाँ से IIT कानपुर में एप्लीकेशन करके दे हैव टेकन बेनिफिट ऑफ निधि प्रयास फंड, और वो सेम फंड के लिए आपके यहाँ अप्लाई करते हैं, केवल उस सिनेरियो में आई थिंक द ऑब्जेक्शन शुड बी देयर. इन एवरी अदर सिनेरियो को इंक्यूबेशन शुड बी परफेक्टली ओके एंड अलाउड. वी डू दैट. कैसे करते हैं उसके बारे में अगर आपको सवाल है तो यू कैन सर्टेनली गेट इन टच विद आकांक्षा और भाव्या एंड वी विल सर्टेनली हेल्प यू आउट. आई होप दैट आंसर्स द क्वेश्चन. Bhavya, I think TIC ने लिया. Yes, sir, it's regarding of funding. Can you allow them for a minute, just directly to ask the question so that I can exactly answer?
Okay. So I request Rishabh to please unmute TIC.
We have to unmute him. I have allowed him to speak.
जी सर, TIC से कौन बात कर रहा है? अपना नाम बता दीजिए और आई थिंक अभी आपका अनम्यूट हो गया. यू कैन आस्क द क्वेश्चन.
Yes, sir. This is Kaushal from IIIT Gwalior.
जी कौशल जी बताइए.
सर ये फंडिंग के रिगार्डिंग में ही क्वेश्चन है मेरा. एक हमारा स्टार्टअप था सेम, वो 2 जगह से फंडिंग ले रहा था. तो उस स्थिति में यह था कि इधर से भी टर्म कंडीशन कोई साइन नहीं थे, उधर से भी नहीं थे. तो इस स्थिति में किस फंडिंग इंक्यूबेटर का वो स्टार्टअप माना जाएगा बेसिकली, क्योंकि दोनों ही फंडिंग उसको दे रहे हैं. तो काउंट किसका बनेगा वो?
सर 2 चीजें हैं. देखिए, अगर किसी ने भी एग्री, पहली बात तो बिना किसी पेपर वर्क के फंडिंग आपको देने नहीं चाहिए. एटलीस्ट एट मिनिमम एक सिंपल ग्रांट एग्रीमेंट का साइन होना ही चाहिए बिटवीन द इंक्यूबेटर एंड द कंपनी दैट इज बीइंग फंडेड, जो स्टार्टअप होगा. अगर वो इंडिविजुअल इनोवेटर है तो भी उस केस में एक प्री इंक्यूबेशन एग्रीमेंट या एक
ये सर इंक्यूबेटर मतलब एग्रीमेंट साइन किया हुआ है, दोनों जगह से ही है. हेलो.
आई होप आपको आवाज आ रही है मेरी.
यस सर.
हाँ, दूसरा इंपॉर्टेंट कंपोनेंट ये भी है कि अगर सेम फंडिंग स्कीम के लिए वो फंड ले रहा है आपसे और किसी और इंक्यूबेटर से भी, तो इट इज अ वायलेशन ऑफ द एलिजिबिलिटी क्राइटेरिया एंड द गाइडलाइंस ऑफ द फंडिंग एजेंसी. उसके लिए अगर आप देखेंगे किसी भी फंडिंग एजेंसी का एग्रीमेंट खा करके या हमारे एग्रीमेंट का सैंपल कॉपी भी आप मांग सकते हैं किसी से, तो उसमें एक कंडीशन लिखी होती है लास्ट में कि क्लॉज होता है कि आपने सेम प्रोजेक्ट के लिए किसी और जगह से फंडिंग नहीं ली है. ये आपको सेल्फ सर्टिफाई करना होता है जो स्टार्टअप फंड ले रहा है उसको. तो अनलेस वो होता है तो वो वायलेशन में है इंडियन लॉ के. तो स्टार्टअप की तरफ से ही गलत है. बाकी और कोई तरीका नहीं है इसको जस्टिफाई या फिगर आउट करने का कि वो कहां और से फंडिंग लिया है या नहीं लिया है.
ओके सर, थैंक यू सर.
जी. Bhavya, is there any other question?
Yes, sir. So next question we have from Ishwar Chand. He is asking, farmers also have the idea to start a startup, but farmers do not have the information to start a company. So how will the farmers get all this information and get initial financial support?
विश्वचंदी, देखिए 2-3 चीजें हैं. पहला तो ये कि इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं है, इतनी जानकारी अवेलेबल है कि कंपनी बनाने के लिए क्या चाहिए और कंपनी में किस तरह के लोग होने चाहिए, वो सब आपको मिल जाता है. और दूसरा ये कि कोई भी CA कंपनी कैसे बनती है वो सब सिखा देगा. वो बड़ा चैलेंज होता भी नहीं है, क्योंकि 10-12 हजार रुपये आप खर्चा करेंगे कानपुर जैसे शहर में या किसी छोटे शहर में, और कोई भी CA आपको कंपनी बनाने में हेल्प कर देगा. आपको 2 डायरेक्टर बनाने पड़ेंगे और कंपनी बना के तैयार कर देगा. इंपॉर्टेंट ये है कि कंपनी सिर्फ पेपर पे लीगल एंटिटी बनाने से कंपनी नहीं बनती है. तो कंपनी के अंदर फंड कहाँ से आएगा, कंपनी के अंदर प्रोडक्ट क्या बनेगा, कंपनी सर्विस क्या बेचेगी, वो सर्विस किसको बेचेगी, वो प्रोडक्ट किसको बेचेगी, और उसके अगेंस्ट पैसा कैसे आएगा, ये जरूरी होता है. फार्मर्स के केस में एक FPO या FPC करके स्पेसिफिक कैटेगरी होती है कंपनी लॉ में, विच इज फार्मर प्रोडक्शन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या कॉर्पोरेशन. आप अगर एफपीसी या एफपीओ बना रहे हैं फार्मर्स के लिए तो वो सबसे ज्यादा बेनिफिशियल है। अगर वो डायरेक्टली फार्मिंग एक्टिविटीज से रिलेटेड कंपनी है, विच कैन बी एग्री प्रोड्यूस पे काम कर रही है, वो अगर वो एग्री फूड की प्रोसेसिंग पे काम कर रही है, तो एफपीसी या एफपीओ बना सकते हैं डायरेक्टली। उसके लिए पूरी गाइडलाइन सारी अवेलेबल होती है, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया की वेबसाइट पे हैं, बहुत सारे यूट्यूब चैनल में मिल जाएगी आपको। स्टार्टअप से रिलेटेड इन्फॉर्मेशन स्टार्टअप इंडिया की वेबसाइट पे बहुत सारी अवेलेबल है, आप वहां भी जा सकते हैं। उसके अलावा जो इंक्यूबेटर में एग्रीकल्चर पे काम हो रहा है, जैसे कि हमारे यहाँ पे काम होता है, देर आर बहुत सारे एग्री इंक्यूबेटर आरएबीआई के अंडर, नाबार्ड में, या फिर मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर के अंदर बहुत सारे इंक्यूबेटर्स हैं जहाँ पे एग्री स्पेसिफिक सपोर्ट मिल रहा है, तो आप वहां रीच आउट कर सकते हैं। तीसरा और कंपोनेंट है एग्री यूनिवर्सिटीज जो हैं, ज्यादातर एग्री कृषि से रिलेटेड विद्यालय हैं, उन सब में भी किसी ना किसी डिवीजन में, किसी ना किसी कंपोनेंट में इंक्यूबेटर का फ्रेमवर्क होता है। भले ही वहां पर इंक्यूबेटर एक्टिव है या नहीं है वो एक अलग बात है, बट फ्रेमवर्क तो रहता है। तो आप उनसे बात कर सकते हैं, वहां पे किसी प्रोफेसर तक पहुंच सकते हैं और वो आपको बता सकते हैं कि फंडिंग और कृषि से रिलेटेड जो साधन है उसके लिए क्या किया जा सकता है। Bhavya, next question. Is there another question?
Yes, sir. So next question we have, which funding method should be opted in the beginning when not many startups are incubated with us?
Sir, it's not about funding method. मैंने जो कैटेगराइजेशन किया था, like I mentioned, कि वो कैटेगराइजेशन सिर्फ इस लिहाज से है कि कौन से फंडिंग सोर्स रिकरिंग हो सकते हैं, लगातार क्रमवार हर साल दर साल आपके पास आते रहेंगे, और दूसरे ऐसे जो वन टाइम एक्टिविटीज के हैं कि आपको आज अगर आपके इंक्यूबेटर को मिल गया है तो जरूरी नहीं कि अगले साल भी आपके इंक्यूबेटर को मिलेगा ही मिलेगा। ये कैटेगराइजेशन यूजुअली इसलिए होता है कि बहुत सारी फंडिंग स्कीम्स ऐसी होती हैं जो टाइम पीरियड के लिए बनती हैं, कि 2 साल के लिए बनी है, 3 साल के लिए बनी है, और उसके अंदर जिन इंक्यूबेटर्स को फंड मिलेगा वो उस ड्यूरेशन में मिलेगा, खत्म हो गई। जैसे हमारे यहाँ पर एक इन्वेंट की स्कीम थी टेक्नोलॉजी डेवलपमेंट बोर्ड की तरफ से, वो स्कीम 3 साल के लिए बनी थी, तीसरा साल कंप्लीट हुआ, स्कीम ही खत्म हो गई। तो उसको आप रिकरिंग मान सकते हैं 3 साल के लिए, बट बियॉन्ड 3 इयर्स इट्स नॉन रिकरिंग फंडिंग स्कीम। सिमिलरली जैसे क्या कहते हैं आप, टीबीआई जब आपका बनता है डीएसटी के अंदर, तो वहां से आपको फंड मिलता है कुछ सेटअप बनाने के लिए, लैब बनाने के लिए, कोवर्किंग स्पेस बनाने के लिए। वो सारा जो सेटअप का पैसा मिल रहा है वहां पे उस फंडिंग सोर्स को काम खत्म हो गया। इसके बाद जो भी रेवेन्यू जनरेट होगा, जो भी थ्रू, वो आपका रिकरिंग सोर्स हो जाएगा, क्योंकि वो आपको हर साल मिलेगा और वो आपको डायरेक्टली मिलेगा। जब इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर नया है उस केस में आइडियली आपको कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि आप किसी ऐसे फंडिंग एजेंसी से टाई अप करें जो अर्ली स्टेज में फंडिंग देने को तैयार हैं। जैसे आई थिंक बायरैक में युवा सेंटर करके सपोर्ट होता है, या स्पर्श फेलोशिप्स हैं, या निधि के अंदर डीएसटी के फंड्स हैं। तो ऐसे जो फंड्स हैं उनसे आप रीच आउट करेंगे तो दैट बिकम्स हेल्पफुल। उसके अतिरिक्त आपको कॉर्पस फंड बनाने का सर्टेनली ट्राई करना चाहिए। तो आप अपने जो इंस्टीट्यूट या यूनिवर्सिटी है आप उनको रीच आउट करेंगे एंड दे कैन हेल्प यू टू सेट अप दीज फंड्स। आई होप दैट आंसर्स द क्वेश्चन. Bhavya, there is one more question, I think, from Volga Verma.
Yes, sir.
The question is, what kind of companies or sectors an incubator can approach for CSR fund? Are there any specific sectors where companies offer CSR? Volga जी, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि कौन सी कंपनीज या किस सेक्टर की कंपनीज CSR फंड देते हैं. That is next component. So maybe once I go through the next set of slides, आप लोगों को ये क्लैरिटी मिल जाएगी कि किससे CSR फंड आपको मांगना चाहिए और कहाँ से मांगना चाहिए. And once I've gone through that, फिर मैं आपके क्वेश्चन को आंसर करता हूँ, so that will be more helpful. Bhavya, should I present the next set of slides?
Sir, we have one more question from Mr. Aman Kadia. So, can you please share how can I contact SIC Kanpur? I am seeking for mentorship for my startup.
Incubator.com वेबसाइट है हमारी. वेबसाइट पे आप जाइए, आपको फंडिंग की जानकारी मिल जाएगी, सारे स्कीम की. आपको कॉन्टेक्ट अस पेज पर एक छोटा सा गूगल फॉर्म आता है, आप वहां से फॉर्म भर के सबमिट कर सकते हैं, वो हमारी टीम के पास आता है. उसके अलावा ईमेल आईडी और फोन नंबर दोनों दिया हुआ है, आप डायरेक्टली वहां से भी कॉल कर सकते हैं, बात कर सकते हैं. और बाकी आई थिंक हमारी टीम के अधिकांश लोग जो हैं सोशल मीडिया पर काफी एक्टिव हैं। आप लिंक्डइन या ट्विटर के थ्रू और फेसबुक के थ्रू भी हमें रीच आउट कर सकते हैं। वहां पर हर पोर्टल पे, हमारा प्लेटफॉर्म पे हमारी जो आईडी है वो इनक्यूबेटर IIT के है, तो उन सोशल प्लेटफॉर्म्स के माध्यम से भी आप हमें रीच आउट कर सकते हैं।
Yes, sir. So now we can continue the presentation.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Let me try to reshare it. Yeah, can you guys see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So ये second component बनाने के पीछे का आइडिया ये था कि lot of people will ask कि भाई CSR for the incubator है क्या। तो यहाँ पे मैंने वो कवर किया है कि CSR की जब आप बात कर रहे हैं तो वो CSR एक्ट है क्या, क्यों चाहिए वो इंक्यूबेटर के लिए मिलना, किन किन कंडीशंस के अंदर ये इंक्यूबेटर को सपोर्ट मिलता है। तो CSR is simply the acronym for corporate social responsibility. This is a component which has been introduced section 135 of the Companies Act 2013 में आया था, और उसके बाद से इंडिया हैज बिकम द फर्स्ट कंट्री जो कि मैंडेट करता है CSR फंड फॉर अ सर्टेन टाइप ऑफ कंपनीज। इन एनी अदर कंट्री दिस इज नॉट अ मैंडेट, लॉट ऑफ कंपनीज डू इट फॉर द गुडविल, फॉर द ओवरऑल जेस्चर, बट तब तक जब इंडिया ने लागू किया 2013 में, इंडिया वाज द फर्स्ट कंट्री। इस एक्ट के अंदर 3 तरह के मैंडेट हैं। जिन कंपनीज का नेटवर्थ जो है 500 करोड़ से ज्यादा है, या फिर आपका टर्नओवर 1000 करोड़ से ज्यादा है साल का, या फिर आपका जो नेट प्रॉफिट है वो 5 करोड़ से ज्यादा है। अगर इन तीनों में से किसी भी कंडीशन के अंदर आप आते हैं तो आपको पिछले 3 साल का जो एवरेज प्रॉफिट है, नेट प्रॉफिट, उसका 2% CSR एक्टिविटीज में खर्चा करना होता है। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर कोई कंपनी ए है वो 2019 में 2 करोड़ रुपए का प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर रही है, 2020 में वो 5 करोड़ रुपए का प्रॉफिट जनरेट कर रही है, और 2021 में आते आते वो 3 करोड़ का प्रॉफिट जनरेट करती है, तो तीनों साल का क्यूमुलेटिव प्रॉफिट आपका हुआ 10 करोड़, एवरेज हुआ 3.3। उसका 2% विल बी दी CSR स्पेंड दैट दे हैव टू मेक 2021 के बाद, यानी 2022-23 वाले फाइनेंशियल ईयर में, सॉरी 21-22 के फाइनेंशियल ईयर में उन्हें ये खर्चा करना पड़ेगा। फिर जब वो 22 में आ जाएंगे तो उस साल का और पिछले 2 सालों का एवरेज प्रॉफिट निकाल करके उसका 2% उन्हें अगले साल खर्चा करना होता है। जो TBI है, टेक्नोलॉजी बेस्ड इंक्यूबेटर्स हैं, उसके लिए CSR फंडिंग का मैंडेट जो है वो 12 जो क्लॉज हैं आपके, उसमें शेड्यूल 7 के अंदर के 12 क्लॉज में क्लॉज 9A है जो TBI के लिए CSR फंडिंग कवर करता है, विच ये डायरेक्टली मैंने वर्बटिम उठाया है उस क्लॉज से। कंट्रीब्यूशन टू इंक्यूबेटर्स और रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स इन द फील्ड ऑफ साइंस, टेक्नोलॉजी, इंजीनियरिंग, मेडिसिन, funded by central government or state government or public sector undertaking or any agency of the central government or state government. So any incubator which is funded by either a central government, a state government, or a PSU or any agency of central or state government is eligible to take the CSR funding. The basic compliances that you have to receive the CSR funding from any company, उसके लिए आपको या तो सेक्शन 8 के अंदर नॉन प्रॉफिट कंपनी होना चाहिए, या आपको एक रजिस्टर्ड पब्लिक ट्रस्ट होना चाहिए, या आपको रजिस्टर्ड सोसाइटी होना चाहिए अंडर सेक्शन 12A एंड 80G ऑफ द इनकम टैक्स। जरूरी है बिकॉज इसके बिना जो कंपनी आपको फंड दे रही है वो CSR के अंदर अपना एक्सपेंसेस क्लेम नहीं कर सकती है। कभी भी आप जब किसी कॉर्पोरेट से बात करेंगे या कोई कॉर्पोरेट आपको फंड देने के लिए शॉर्टलिस्ट करेगा या सेलेक्ट करेगा, तो आपको ये नॉर्म या मैंडेट आपको फॉलो करने होते हैं। आपके पास CSR फॉर्म 1 होना चाहिए, आपके पास 80G सर्टिफिकेट होना चाहिए, आपके पास 12AA सर्टिफिकेट होना चाहिए इनकम टैक्स का, आपके पास पैन नंबर होना चाहिए, आपके पास इनकॉर्पोरेशन के डॉक्यूमेंट होने चाहिए, जो कि यूजुअली सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ इनकॉर्पोरेशन है कंपनीज एक्ट के केस में, और ट्रस्ट वगैरह के केस में इट्स अ ट्रस्ट क्रिएशन डॉक्यूमेंट। आपके पास मेमोरेंडम ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड मेमोरेंडम ऑफ एग्रीमेंट और आर्टिकल ऑफ एसोसिएशन, और सॉरी मेमोरेंडम ऑफ एसोसिएशन और आर्टिकल ऑफ एसोसिएशन, ये दोनों डॉक्यूमेंट भी होने चाहिए। दीज आर द बेसिक लिस्ट। फंडिंग एजेंसी आपसे और भी चीजें मांग सकती है, जो फंडिंग एजेंसी मांगेगी आपको वो बेसिकली प्रोवाइड करना पड़ता है फॉर देम टू बी सेटिस्फाइड कि व्हाट दे आर ऑफरिंग एलिजिबल एजेंसी को वो CSR फंड दे रहे हैं। मैं जैसा पहले एक्सप्लेन कर रहा था कि जो CSR फंडिंग रिक्वेस्ट है उसके लिए यूजुअली 2 तरह के मेथड है। कुछ कंपनीज जो बहुत दिनों से CSR फंडिंग कर रही हैं तो उनका अपना सेट पैटर्न है, प्रोसेस है, जिसमें एक एप्लीकेशन फॉर्म है, आप एप्लीकेशन सबमिट करेंगे उनके दिए हुए फॉर्मेट में, और वहां से फिर वो शॉर्टलिस्ट करते हैं कि आपको प्रेजेंटेशन के लिए बुलाते हैं, देन यू आर बेसिकली सिलेक्टेड फॉर द फंडिंग फ्रॉम दी CSR। दूसरा है जहाँ पे एग्जिस्टिंग या नए पार्टनर्स के थ्रू वो CSR पॉलिसी के अंदर प्रपोजल मांगते रहते हैं अपने, तो आप CSR हेड को या CSR टीम को प्रपोजल सबमिट करेंगे, वो उसको रिव्यू करेंगे एंड देन आल्सो गोज टू दी CSR कमिटी प्रेजेंटेशन के लिए, और वहां से फिर कंफर्मेशन आता है। CSR फंड के अंदर जो रिपोर्टिंग है वो यूजुअली जब भी आप CSR फंड किसी कंपनी से लेंगे तो बेसिक ये 5-6 चीजें जो है रिपोर्टिंग में आपसे मैंडेट मांगी जाती हैं। उसमें क्वार्टरली प्रोजेक्ट की प्रोग्रेस अपडेट होगी, सर्टिफिकेट ऑफ कंप्लायंस होगा कि आपने अगर किसी फंडिंग एजेंसी से पैसा लिया है, वो FCR जो GFR नॉर्म फॉलो कर रहा है या नहीं कर रहा है, तो परचेज और सिलेक्शन में आपने कंप्लायंस प्रॉपर फॉलो किए नहीं किए। जो यूटिलाइजेशन सर्टिफिकेट है, यूटिलाइजेशन रिपोर्ट है, वो आपको प्रोजेक्ट के दौरान सेल्फ सर्टिफाइड देनी होती है, और अगर प्रोजेक्ट क्लोजर हो रहा है ट्रांच 1 ट्रांच 2 के बीच में या कंप्लीट क्लोजर हो रहा है तो CA सर्टिफाइड यूसे सबमिट करना होता है। उसके अलावा इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट के लिए एक प्रोजेक्ट क्लोजर रिपोर्ट चाहिए होती है, जिसमें आप ये असेस करके यूजुअली ये थर्ड पार्टीज करती हैं, जो ये असेस करके बताएंगे कि आपने जो पूरा प्रोजेक्ट का काम किया है उसमें इम्पैक्ट जो है वो कैसा आया है, क्या इम्पैक्ट रहा है उसके बीच का। एग्जाम्पल के लिए मैंने ये 3 नाम मेंशन किए थे क्योंकि ये हमारे 3 मेजर इनिशिएटिव रहे पिछले 2-3 सालों में, जिसमें से पहला इनिशिएटिव था जिसमें हमने RECL जो गवर्नमेंट का PSU है, रूरल इलेक्ट्रिफिकेशन कॉर्पोरेशन लिमिटेड, उसके माध्यम से हमने यूपी और MP के 21 कॉलेजेस सेलेक्ट करके वहां पर इंक्यूबेशन और इनोवेशन इकोसिस्टम को सेटअप करने में सपोर्ट किया है। उसमें हमने फैकल्टी मेंबर्स के साथ में बात करना हो या स्टूडेंट के प्रोजेक्ट को सपोर्ट करना हो, वो पूरी एक्टिविटीज करवाई हैं। देन वेंटिलेटर प्रोजेक्ट में हमने नोकार के स्टार्टअप को सपोर्ट किया, मल्टीपल कंपनीज ने उसमें CSR सपोर्ट दिया, और उससे हमने सक्सेसफुल वेंटिलेटर डेवलप करवाने में नोका की मदद की है, जो कि अभी इंडिया में बहुत जगह इंस्टॉल है। देन कोविड की सेकेंड वेव के दौरान हमने एक मिशन भारत O2 करके इनिशिएटिव लिया, जिसमें हमने हमारे 3 स्टार्टअप जो थे, एक्वाफ्रंट इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, स्टेमरेव और फिनटेक लाइफ ट्रू, इन तीनों को सपोर्ट करके ऑक्सीजन प्लांट और ऑक्सीजन कंसंट्रेटर डेवलप करवाने में सपोर्ट किया, और विद इन अ टाइम फ्रेम ऑफ 100 दिन इन कंपनीज ने प्लांट और कंसंट्रेटर बनाए और वो इंस्टॉल करवाए। ये प्राइमरली ICICI सिक्योरिटीज, एनसिस और एंटी डेटा फंडेड था। तो ऐसे मल्टीपल, ऐसा दोनों एग्जांपल है इसमें। देखिए, आप अगर REC वाला पहला एग्जांपल देखोगे तो पूरा इनिशिएटिव फंडेड है सिर्फ एक सिंगल कॉर्पोरेट से। बाकी जो दोनों इनिशिएटिव है उसमें दोनों इनिशिएटिव के अंदर मल्टीपल कॉर्पोरेट्स ने फंड किया है। तो डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द साइज ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट, टाइप ऑफ द प्रोजेक्ट, आप ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि आपको, क्योंकि बड़े प्रोजेक्ट हैं उसमें बहुत सारा पैसा चाहिए, तो आपको मल्टीपल CSR सपोर्ट चाहिए। जब आप मल्टीपल CSR सपोर्ट मांगते हैं फॉर द सेम प्रोजेक्ट, 2 चीजें ध्यान रखनी होती है खासतौर पर। पहला ये कि जिस कंपोनेंट के लिए आपको कोई एक CSR पैसा दे रहा है, उसी कंपोनेंट के लिए आप दूसरे CSR से पैसा नहीं मांगेंगे। दूसरा, उन दोनों को जब आप रिपोर्टिंग करेंगे, दोनों की रिपोर्टिंग में ये क्लियरली आप मेंशन कर पाएं कि जो पैसा मैंने पहले CSR से लिया है, वो खर्चा मैंने यहाँ किया है और उसका इम्पैक्ट ये आया है, और दूसरे CSR से जो मैंने पैसा लिया है वो इन चीजों में खर्च हुआ है और उसका इम्पैक्ट इस तरह से आया है। तो एक्सपेंसेस और इम्पैक्ट दोनों सेपरेटली आपको दिखाने पड़ेंगे, तभी एक सेम प्रोजेक्ट के अंदर मल्टीपल CSR का फंड आप एक्सेप्ट कर सकते हैं। ये यूजुअल फ्रेमवर्क है जो CSR के लिए फॉलो करना रहता है। तो I hope I have cleared some doubts. I'll stop the presentation here and we'll open for the question answers again. भाव्या, कोई नया सवाल है किसी का?
No, sir. As of right now, we are not having questions.
Okay. So I'll come back to the Volga's question. Volga, आपने question पूछा था what kind of companies, sectors and incubator can approach. I think Bhavya, it would be good if you can open, microphone for Volga to ask the question. I hope some of the components have been answered through your presentation,
yes,
and some may not.
Volga can now unmute and speak.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I
Yeah,
audible?
Volga, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm Volga from IIT Mandi Catalyst. So we are into 5 years of operations of this incubator, and now we do feel that need of generating and raising these CSR funds. So my question was again, are there any specific sectors are in trend where we can tap right now? Like
Right.
there are, for example, waste management, or the companies which are kind of offering CSR fund in a specific sectors.
Right. So to answer that, you can see two components, क्योंकि CSR जो पूरा फ्रेमवर्क है कंपनीज एक्ट का, उसके अगेंस्ट ऐसा कोई मैंडेट नहीं है कि किस तरह की कंपनी CSR करेंगी या किस तरह के इंक्यूबेटर को CSR दिया जाएगा. काफी ओपन मैंडेट है कि एनी इंक्यूबेटर फंडेड बाय सेंट्रल और स्टेट गवर्नमेंट कैन सीक द CSR फंड. And similarly, every company that falls in any of the three categories that I mentioned has to complete the CSR. Usually, the companies which are part of, which have a good R&D space, where they are engaged in the innovation activities, where they are engaged in research activities, usually I've seen them to be, pretty good and proactive in terms of the CSR engagements. The best process would be कि आप जो, since आप मंडी में हैं, तो particularly the companies which are based in the vicinity of mandi would be good companies to tap in. Similarly, अगर आपका incubator किसी sector में है, मतलब particular sector specific, because SIC is sector agnostic, so we don't talk about particular sectors. But there are incubators which are focused on biotech companies. There are incubators which are focused on agri-tech companies. There are incubators which are focused on AI, ML, or artificial intelligence companies. So if you are focused on certain sectors, a good idea would be to approach the companies which are, in these same sectors or allied sectors. Then you can also see from the previous year activities of the company's CSR. So if a company A has been spending a good amount of money into waste to value segment, or in education, or in, say, skilling, so they would certainly be inclined to support a proposal, an initiative which focuses in these directions. So these are some of the areas which you can try to focus on when you are writing the proposal and reaching out to CSRs. Another way can be, since you are a new incubators, you have been just there for 5 years, the usual response from the companies when the incubators are new is you won't have the bandwidth to follow the compliance and these procedures. So maybe once you are older enough, or you have the set process and these compliances, tab aap aayega, will certainly help and give funds. So in those cases, partnering with a big incubator or an established incubator can be a good way. So you can partner with IIT Kanpur, you can partner with IIT Bombay, you can partner with some other incubators which have been established and have been running the incubation activities. So those kind of initiatives can be certainly developed in collaboration with these already established incubators. And then according to the program mandate that you propose in the proposal, the money can be divided into multiple segments. A part can be taken by the older incubator, a part can be taken by the newer incubator. So all sorts of possibilities will be there.
Okay, great. Thanks for your answer. Thanks for clarifying.
Rahul, we have 2 more questions.
Sure. Please, Bhavya, you can.
Yes, sir. So the next question is how to decide equity or revenue framework?
That's an interesting question. Unfortunately, it is coming from anonymous, so we don't know who has asked the question. See, there is no set process or pattern. You may have heard this notion very frequently. Valuation is an art, not a science. And that really holds true. The best method for the incubators to follow can be that since you are incubating or supporting the very new company, very nascent companies where the companies may be less than a year old, where the founders are having the experience of less than a year or less than 2 years, you can ask for higher equities from these companies because they would certainly need a lot more support. If the companies that are coming to you are of having the founders who have been there for 4 or 5 years in the market, who have understood the ground, who have some certain kind of connects, they may not need that much of support. So based on the kind of support, you can decide who to ask more equity or for whom to ask, lesser equity. Another framework, a good framework is, for the incubation kind of support that we offer in the country. You should not ask for more than 4 or 3% of the equity as a good gesture, because the seed stage or Series A stage is where you have to part away with 10%, 15% of the company's equity, and then for Series A you have to part away with more than 20% equity. So going back those standards, the founders are usually left with lesser equity, and if the incubator is taking larger equity in the initial stages, it doesn't fit well. So that could be a good framework. As far as the revenue sharing is concerned, you have to try to evaluate the company in 2 brackets, whether the company is going to be a consistent revenue generating company where it will grow slowly, but will have a steady, rise and in the terms of revenue that it will generate. So there you should go for more revenue share than equity. In the companies where the stronger growth, exponential growth is possible, there you should go for equity sharing, or also the companies where it is biotech companies or the deep R&D companies where it will take 4 to 5 years horizon from lab to a actual market product. Their revenue share won't make sense for you and for the company both. So going for an equity sharing will make sense. So these kind of frameworks you can try to establish based on the market trends, based on the historical backgrounds available. Bhavya, next question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So next question we have from Mr. Ashish. There are many platforms claiming that they will provide us CSR projects. How do you see it?
Sure, Ashish. So some of them will certainly be genuine. Reason is that since CSR is, like I mentioned, CSR is a pretty much new framework for the corporates of India. So they are also trying to see how they can, maximize the impact using the same amount of money that they have. And now also a lot of scrutiny has been there, and for the corporates, they would certainly not want to be in a wrong side of the scrutiny when it is happening. So they would want the money to be spent in accordance to the compliances and law. So they employ or they partner with companies that are champions or rather knowledgeable in the whole social impact or the framework or the compliances. So they partner with these companies, and these companies in turn go out and reach out to multiple such partners, which can be incubators, which can be NGOs, which can be non-profit organizations of the other kind. And based on the proposals and all, they'll reach out to the corporate and then help you out. So there are a lot of genuine cases as well, but then there are also a lot of we usually see as the middlemen or the broker kind of people who will ask for 10%, 15% of the cut only for the sake of getting the money to you as the part of the CSR activities. So if anyone is asking for or claiming for exorbitant consulting fee, they certainly are not a good fit, and you should not partner with them. But if they are genuine consulting agencies, you must try to engage with them and see how best they can help you out and support. So I hope I've answered this. Bhavya, are there any more questions?
No, sir. There are no questions anymore.
Okay. If there are no questions, we can certainly close or wrap this up. Akansha?
Yes. Hope we have answered all your questions. If there are any other remaining questions, please share. Okay, so we can wrap this up. Thank you, Rahul, for sharing the insights and building the knowledge base for gaining sustainability in funding. It is truly a vital block in building an incubators. And thank you everyone for being with us for this webinar. Hope it becomes fruitful for capacity building in future. We'll have 2 more webinars in the deep engagement session in the upcoming days, and we will be sharing the details with you shortly. Good evening. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for spending the evening and organizing this to the team. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.